4, 3. Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent, Holland, and welcome, one and all, to Night Fright. Tonight, folks, we're continuing with Donderi from Montreal and his new book called UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. UFOs and alien abductions are a phenomena, folks, that I feel needs to be covered more in depth. There's a lot of people out there suffering traumatically from being abducted. And Don offers some real solutions to how we could help solve and ease some of their traumatization. Just let me read this, and then we'll get going. Just after the atomic bombs were released on Japan in 1945, thus bringing an end to the Second World War, there were a plethora of reports flooding in about unidentified flying objects, UFOs as we call them today, particularly over the skies of New Mexico. Then suddenly in 1947, a UFO crash occurred at Roswell, New Mexico. Now this area was close in proximity to where top secret nuclear bomb testing was being carried out. Very quickly, a government UFO study group was assembled to investigate what was going on. Now, height of the Cold War, folks? Was this a threat by the Soviet Union, or could there be something more going on? Only a year later, in 1948, the United States Air Force Air Technical Intelligence Center released its study on UFOs, and it clearly stated that, and I'm going to quote this, folks, UFOs were probably of extraterrestrial origin. Wow. The Air Force Chief of Staff immediately ordered the complete report destroyed. However, folks, long before WikiLeaks took place, a former U.S. Air Force officer by the name of Edward J. Ruppelt brought the hidden information to the surface. Our guest, as I said before, is Don Donderi. It's the second part of a two-part show. UFOs and alien abductees. A scientist looks at the evidence, and I got to adjust my glasses. Forgive me for mispronouncing some names. I hate this getting old stuff, but it's the nature of the beast. I got to wear glasses now. So don't go anywhere, folks. Get the talk, get the coffee going, get the tea going, get a beverage of your choice going. Stick around and join us. It's going to be one heck of a ride tonight. Strap in and hang on, because here we go. Welcome, one and all. Welcome to Night Fright. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight, folks, UFOs and alien abductees. UFO, ETs, and alien abductions, a scientist looks at the evidence, is a new book by Don Crosby Donderi, a retired professor of psychology and former associate dean of the Faculty of Graduate Studies and Research at McGill University in Montreal. Donderi reviews and analyzes 60 years of accumulated evidence that some of what people report as UFOs are indeed extraterrestrial vehicles, that some of the extraterrestrial UFOs have crews, and that some of the extraterrestrial crews, you ready for this? Catch and release humans to study them. He evaluates the reliability of the evidence by referring to modern theories of memory, motivation, and thinking. He explains the scientific and government reaction to the evidence. Welcome back, Don. Thanks for joining us once again.
You're welcome. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. I'd like to begin tonight's show once again by going not a stone's throw from Kingston, Ontario, and that is just across the border to Quebec, with a sighting that took place, the true story of Lake Basketong. Can we start with that one?
We certainly can.
That was really unnerving when I read it in your book. www.nightfrightshow.com, folks. The book is called UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. Our guest tonight, Don Donderi, PhD from McGill. Thanks, Don.
The year was 1978.
Yeah.
The event was this. The Montreal Star published some photographs that were held up by one of two people. I call them in the book John Smith and Bob Jones. That's not their real names. They were French Canadians who lived in goodness, I've forgotten now. One of the islands just north of, just off Montreal. anyway, one of the islands off Montreal, they were looking for property to buy on the Bascatong Reservoir, which is a reservoir far to the northwest of Montreal, a couple of 100 kilometers. They drove up on March 21st, 1978. There was still snow on the ground. They put their belongings, they parked their car in a nearby restaurant parking lot, took a toboggan in to pull their camping gear with them, and were going to camp out on the side of the lake overnight, look at the property, and go back the next day, a kind of early spring vacation plus having a look at some property.
So they footed it into the bush?
They footed it into the bush with their toboggan dragging behind them. This was a lake with cabins. They set themselves up on the porch of a cabin, not inside because it was closed, and were going to camp out. They went to get firewood. They went down by the lake. They saw a bright star descend over the lake and hover there. One of the two picked up his camera and took 4 photographs. The other guy, who also had a camera, was transfixed, couldn't do anything. They got their firewood, went back to the camp, decided this was too much, put their stuff on the toboggan, and decided to get the heck out of there. They did. They looked around, they saw the UFO high in the sky. That propelled them further. They got back into their car, they drove back, and they went home. The guy who had the photographs had them developed by his brother-in-law, who was a professional photographer. He called the Montreal Star. The Montreal Star took a picture of him holding the photographs, and then the photographs and the story were eventually published in Montreal, which is a French-language magazine. My friend, the engineer Bill Wilson, who was mentioned in the earlier episode, happened to see the story in the Star. He started calling around to see if he could find out one of these guys. He called finally to the guy who took the photographs. The guy was really unwilling to work with Bill Wilson because once the photographs had been published, everybody came knocking at his door. He was a family man. He was being disturbed in his home at peace, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. Nevertheless, my friend Bill Wilson, who was very persuasive in both languages, persuaded him to cooperate. We took the photographs to McGill. I had a McGill photo technician look at them under a microscope. He decided on the basis of the evidence in the photographs and some test photographs we'd taken to compare with them using the same camera in the same location a couple of months later when we could go back there, that the original negatives had not been tampered with. So what this guy had was photographs of a large, luminous, saucer-shaped object, classical flying saucer shape, hovering about 1,000 meters from where they were, about maybe a couple of 100 meters over the lake, and we don't know what it was. What could it have been? Here are the possibilities. It first could have been a fake, but the photographs were vetted by a photo technician who knew what he was doing, and he said they weren't a fake. Second, they could have been some secret craft of ours. We don't know about everything the US government or the Canadian government makes. It might have been some American or Canadian craft, secret, flying over Lake Bascatong in the middle of the night in March 1978. Or, barring those things, it could have been a vehicle with superior performance characteristics that we didn't make. Those are the 3 possibilities. That's the story. That's only one of many such stories in the book we're talking about.
And also, folks, that those stories and stories that were in the first part of the show are available in this book, and the book is called UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. A scientist, that's a big word there, a scientist looks at the evidence, and that leads credibility to all these stories, folks. And you can, easy way to get the book, folks, is just go to www.nightfrightshow.com and click on tonight's guest book cover, and that'll take you right to a spot. By the way, folks, we're live tonight from Kingston, Ontario. We're at Chapters Indigo, and for our American folks, that's a version of Barnes & Noble, if you will. That's Canada's version of it. We've got a live audience tonight, and thank you all for joining us. Stick around, folks. There's going to be a Q&A after. It's going to be part of the show, so if you are formulating questions right now, hang on to them, and in a few minutes we'll be turning the floor over to you, and you'll be able to ask Don directly some questions you may have about all of this. Now, Don, it seems that since 1947, most of the sightings, and you can correct me on this, have been geographically located in what I would call the Western powers. Would that be accurate? Not at all.
Fortunately, no.
Okay,
because
fire
if it was
away.
just the Western powers, you'd wonder if there was some exclusivity here.
Yes.
There's a good deal of evidence, not cited in my book, because I'm mostly using Western sources, that in the former Soviet Union, there were plenty of UFOs cited, and they continue to be cited to this
Really?
day. Yes. There's anecdotes, of course, because during the Soviet era, there wouldn't have been the freedom of expression in the Soviet Union that you get in Russia now.
Interesting. Yes,
So there
of course.
are anecdotal accounts. There are U.S. senators and official representatives who were on visits to the Soviet Union who saw them while they were there, while taking a train ride, as a matter of fact, across the Soviet Union at one point or another. So yes, there are accounts of Soviet UFOs, and I'm not up to date fully on those, but it is definitely not just the West. Of course, the West has radio, television,
Yes.
open discussion, public fora, and so we know what happens in the West. We don't know what happened in the middle of China, and where there have been some recent UFO sightings, or in the old days, in the middle of the Soviet Union. And so
Any
that's,
idea if there's a dialogue going on between governments? Now, I know that this is kind of off the cuff question, but any idea if there could be some unification based on an exterior threat?
oh boy, I don't, but that's been discussed. The representative of, I think, Trinidad or Guyana, a guy named Gary, raised that issue at the UN 25 years ago.
Interesting.
But nothing ever came of it. He was an official UN representative. He may have been his country's prime minister. He may have been the UN ambassador. I'm not sure which. But he raised that question and wanted the UN to take it up, but they didn't.
They didn't.
Right now, I know that the US has a UFO program that they're not telling us about. I have data I can't cite about that, and I have rumors that everybody hears about that. So it's not that we don't know that, it's just that I have a little more information than most people do, which I cannot cite, but I have what everybody else has, which is plenty of talk about what was and wasn't covered up, what wasn't scooped up after it crashed. Roswell, you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Roswell is certainly a good example of that, and there are others. Yes, the US government knows what's going on.
Okay. Now, I want to go back to the beginning of Project Blue Book, and before that, and by the way, folks, Project Blue Book is a series of investigations that took place in the 60s and to investigate the UFO phenomena to see if there was anything actually associated with it. Now, what I found very alarming is that there is a whole level of top secret clearance beyond the President of the United States. In other words, he doesn't know what's going on.
That's right.
There's somebody above him. Now, two questions. Why is that, and who is that?
Well, first of all, you're almost right about that. And this is widely known because the level of classifications available in the US have been published. There's what's called unacknowledged special access programs, or so-called black project. This is not a fictional fantasy. These are real. I'll give you an example. You start a project with a defense contractor, say it's McDonnell Douglas. The project is about developing reconnaissance vehicles. That's just what it's called. The project gets going. It's public contract. There's a contract documents. You can go to the government and find those documents. You look up the contract documents. It says McDonnell Douglas is working on atmospheric research devices. The government says to McDonnell Douglas, you're doing a good job. Keep on doing it, but we'll close the contract. The contract is closed. The public only knows that they've spent, say, 2 years working on upper atmosphere research devices. Then the public knows no more. What the government has told McDonnell Douglas to do is go on working on this, but we'll call it an unacknowledged special access program, or black program. The program will have a title. 4 people in the U.S. Congress know that title. The House and Senate Armed Services Committee, the House and Senate Appropriations Committee chairs. That's it. They know the names. They don't know what the programs are. The programs are run by whatever directorate of the U.S. military is running those programs.
Really?
That's the only people who know, yes. And this is widely known. This has been established under what's called the Atomic Energy Control Act of, I think, 1947. There are laws which prevent any information under that rubric from getting out to the public. And that means any public, including the President of the United States.
Now, that's mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing, I
It
agree.
absolutely is.
And
Because
those,
the president's elected, we the people,
yes,
right?
that's
Democracy.
right. But we the people, under that law, don't have to tell the President what we, the military, is doing on certain secret projects. That was designed to keep atomic energy secrets out of the hands of the enemy, namely the Soviet Union. That legislation is still being used for that purpose, but it's also being used to conceal secret research, which is, as a colleague of mine named Bernard Heesch, who's written this in a public website called UFOskeptic.org, says, it can be concealed from anyone because it is born secret, as the way he puts it.
Born secret, that's a very good way to put it, actually.
Under these legislations. So yes, there are U.S. government secret projects having to do with UFOs that nobody knows about except the people doing the projects. And I know that, as I said, because I have access to people who've told me so. Information I cannot share with you, but I swear is true.
Okay, fair enough, folks. www.nightfrightshow.com. Click on tonight's guest book cover. It's going to take you right to a spot where you can order the book from your own home. The book's fabulous, folks. I've read it from cover to cover, made my notes in it, and it's one of those books that is going to answer a lot of questions and actually leave you with a lot of questions as well as to where we're going to go from here. A scientist looks at the evidence. Don Donderi is our guest tonight, all the way from Montreal. Don, I want to go back to the president not knowing what's going on. And is that because the president could be removed in 4 years with an election, and they just don't want him to know? Is it plausible denial or something? I can't wrap my head around the fact that the president of the United States, elected by the people, doesn't have access to the most top secret stuff.
Neither can I.
It's like I said before, it's mind-blowing.
The evidence that I have suggests that even the heads of one of the most important intelligence agencies in the country doesn't have access to that information. I'm not kidding you.
Wow.
And that's all I can say.
That's all you can say.
But this evidence is, as Bernie Heesch said, born secret, quote unquote. 2 American senators, both dead now, Jesse Helms and Patrick Moynihan, one a Republican, one a Democrat, tried together to get that legislation changed back in the 70s. They failed. They couldn't persuade their fellow senators or representatives to revise the law. So the law stands, and it's being used to keep a lot of government research projects completely under wraps.
Unbelievable, folks. Unbelievable in this day and age, democracy. Okay, let's go back to the start of the Cold War. I had mentioned the Roswell crash. For me, that's kind of a watershed moment for several reasons. It's like MUFON Northern Ontario MUFON director Michel Deschamps told me the reason why the UFOs come here since 1947 is because they realized that we started playing with nuclear weapons. And it's kind of, the analogy he said is kind of like the children have found the matches. I think
You're
that's
right.
very apropos.
I think you're right.
Can we talk about Roswell? Can we talk about the whole Cold War and Truman and Eisenhower, that whole administration?
I'd love to. It occupies a good chapter or so in that book.
Well, maybe we could
But
just...
a little bit.
Okay, there you go.
I'll also
Give
tell
anything
you,
away.
I'll tell you something you didn't know, and I didn't know until I went to the MUFON conference held in Las Vegas about a week ago. I was there from the 19th to the 21st. At that conference, a female journalist from Italy published new data on a crash that was supposed to have taken place about 30 days to 60 days after the first atomic bomb explosion in 1945.
Really?
Really. She
In
claimed
Japan?
the test, Trinity test.
Oh, the Trinity test.
Then there
Okay,
were the
okay.
2 bombs dropped on Japan shortly afterwards.
That's right. Yeah.
And a UFO was crashed near Alamogordo
I had no idea.
sometime in 1945. That I learned, and this is not as well documented as Roswell,
Yeah.
but it seems fairly convincing. But the Roswell is thoroughly documented. That's a case in which a UFO crashed in 1947, shortly after the first widely known public sighting. The Kenneth Arnold sighting took place in July 1947, June 1947.
Just a month before.
Just a month before. It was northwest United States over the Cascades. A private pilot saw the UFOs. He mentioned them when he landed to refuel. The word got out. The next stop he landed, there was a reporter there. He said to the reporter, it looked like these 9 things were sort of skipping on the air like this. He said they were like stones skipping on water. The reporter, or the headline writer for the Associated Press, call them flying saucers, and the name stuck. That's where it came from.
That's where it came from.
But that story preceded the Roswell by about 2 weeks.
That's right.
And so this all happened in a short time during the summer of '47. Roswell was a crash, well attested by the person who first saw the wreckage. The wreckage was immediately scooped up by the U.S. government. People were intimidated into not saying anything about
That's
it.
right.
People were taken off the air, like you perhaps at the time. If they'd started to talk about the story. This happened, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And then
I should just
yeah.
This is long before Twitter, folks.
Yes,
Long
yes,
before the
yes.
internet, when you could get things out.
Exactly.
For example, we're entertaining things from Iran, the depths of Iran, through social media.
Exactly.
Syria at this time as well. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, all there were telephones in those days.
And not everybody had a telephone.
Exactly,
Yeah.
including the guy who found the debris.
He had to travel a few days to
That's
find
right.
a telephone.
That's right.
Yeah.
The long and short of it was the U.S. government scooped up everything there was to know about Roswell, intimidated as many people as they could find into not talking about what they had seen, covered up evidence about who was there, scurried the broken pieces, including the crashed disc they found, off to Dayton, Ohio, which is where the Air Technical Information Center and Wright-Patterson Field was. And that's the last anyone heard about that, until about 1977, when your friend Stanton Friedman
And your friend.
and my friend was on a lecture tour, and somebody began talking to him about people who knew about this and who he might talk to himself. So from there, Stanton opened the case. Other people filled in the details. Several books have been written since. The long and short of it is that in Roswell in 1947, a UFO crashed. There were dead humanoids on the aliens, on the UFO. The UFO was disassembled in pieces, carted off to the Air Force. It's been there since 1947. End of story. And that's all we know, but the investigators put together, piece by piece, interview by interview, what I've just described in great detail.
By the way, folks, Stanton Friedman's been on the show many, many times. You'll find all his shows there, www.nightfrightshow.com. Free to download, no problem whatsoever. Also, tonight's show, UFOs, ETs, and alien abductions. Just click on tonight's guest book cover with Donderi, and that'll take you right to a place where you can order the book from your own home. Let's go back into Roswell. Now, Truman was the president at the time. Was he shocked when he heard about the revelations that were taking place in Roswell? How did he find out about it? Because we had just talked about the fact now, and it wasn't like that back then, that the president doesn't have access to that information. But back then, I'm sure he would have.
It is apparent, and this is still a bit murky, that after Roswell, or immediately before, remember I just mentioned somebody has unearthed evidence about a 1945 crash.
Yeah, this is unbelievable.
So there might have been an organization in place in the U.S. government called by the people who know this, MJ-12. Stanton Friedman has written a book about this. Other people have disputed it. It's one of those areas that's highly controversial, probably because there's been disinformation put out to make it less believable.
Yeah.
Long and short of it is, the U.S. government, since at least 1947, has probably had an oversight committee dealing with UFO problems. And that committee, whoever they are, knows what's going on. And they know, and we don't know. And that's their goal, to make sure we don't know. Bits leak out. Roswell has leaked out. Roswell has been very thoroughly documented. Another case, as I said, has just been documented, and it may not be as thoroughly studied as Roswell, but it's highly suggestive at this point. So the U.S. government most likely does have what you might call a UFO directorate, which supervises keeping the information from the public as well as doing whatever the U.S. government thinks needs to be done about UFOs. About Canada, probably the Canadian government has nothing. It's not interested. Canada's not a large player. Canada was interested, or people in the government were interested back in the 50s, but I don't think, honestly, anything's come of it. I've heard no rumors, no leaks, nothing to suggest that Canada has a, quote, UFO program.
No, I haven't
But-
heard that either,
but-
although
yeah.
Paul Hellyer was on the show.
Paul Hellyer thinks, he's
Yeah.
convinced, of course.
Yeah.
And he was the Minister of Defense.
That's
so
right.
He
Under
should
Trudeau.
know. Yeah,
he should know. He also believes, folks, for those of you who are Canadian, that he thoroughly believes that the Area 51 has an Arrow aircraft fully intact stored there along with the alien artifacts.
You mean they didn't destroy them all?
They didn't, apparently not.
That's
apparently
good.
There's one down at Area 51. So, yeah. Just Google Arrow, folks. I don't want to go into it right now, but it was a phenomenal aircraft that the Canadians made. And all those aerospace folks, when they were let go, went to NASA. And in 10 years, we landed on the moon. Enough said. And that's a fact.
I like that very much.
Yeah. So let's continue now. Then Eisenhower came in. And things started to tighten up a little bit. We got Alan Dulles in charge of the CIA at the time, and I'm going to bring a little bit of Kennedy into this as well, because it's the same type of cover-up, and it's a template that's been used over and over and over again, disinformation, as you've described as well. What happened under the Eisenhower administration? Well, I thought this was absolutely fascinating, by the way.
This is fascinating. Now we're in 1952. And there was a huge UFO flap over Washington. Flap is the word that UFO experts use to describe a lot of sightings that everybody sees. So people were seeing things over Washington, D.C., restricted airspace, by the way. You're not supposed to fly through it, but UFOs were flying over the city, over the capital.
That's chutzpah.
That's chutzpah. Jets were sent up to chase them away. The jets couldn't catch them, although they did see them. Airline pilots approaching the city saw them, and so forth. And radar plots were taken of them.
That's right.
The guy in charge at the time of so-called Project Blue Book was an Air Force captain. Captain is a middle-ranking officer now. Think about that. Not a high-ranking officer. But Edward Ruppelt, a bright guy, was in charge of Project Blue Book, the official U.S. Air Force reporting agency for UFOs in 1952. He came to Washington. He was supposed to look into things. He did. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he collected the reports. The press wanted to know what he thought. He told them that he couldn't rule out what were called ground returns from the radar, an atmospheric distortion, which means the radar, a signal which goes up, actually is bouncing off your coffee cup and pretending the coffee cup is up in the air. That is something that radar sometimes does. He didn't think it happened, but being absolutely cautious, he didn't want to say it couldn't have happened. So the press bought that. The flap died down, although reports kept coming in, and Ruppelt sort of went back to studying UFOs. The president's Air Force aide called Ruppelt and said, "What's going on?" Ruppelt said, "Well, I don't know, but it might have been ground returns." That word went to the president, President Eisenhower, President Truman in '52. He didn't believe a word of it. He wanted the CIA to investigate. So the CIA set up a commission called the Robertson Panel. The Robertson Panel looked into what was going on. The Robertson Panel decided this, and this is all documentation now. First, that we don't know what UFOs are. The panel itself was biased, it was not well informed, it was very high level, but it was ignorant, unlike Ruppelt. They decided what was dangerous in 1952 was UFO reports, because UFO reports were confusing the Ground Observer Corps. The Ground Observer Corps in 1952 was the civilian organization that took binoculars and looked around the sky for Russian bombers. And that went with the radar. And between the human observers and the radar, they were supposed to keep America safe from Russian bombers, who presumably were going to fly right over Canada because they didn't care about Canada. Sorry about that. There was nothing vital to bomb here, but there was south of the border. Anyway, the Robertson Panel recommended that the government debunk UFOs and sort of intimidate people who were interested in them by tracking the UFO groups because they might be disruptive to the political system, and debunking every possible sighting and essentially closing public interest in it down. That they did. They started to do it very effectively. There were other private people interested in UFOs. They didn't shut them down, but the government stopped admitting that there was any interest in it. All the cases they allegedly purported were solved, quote unquote, and all of the good data were classified. So that was the beginning of what you call a deliberate downplaying of any UFO information on behalf of on the part of the U.S. government.
It was an intentional campaign to cover up without question.
Absolutely.
Folks, www.nightfrightshow.com. There you will find tonight's guest book cover. Click on that, and all the stories we're discussing tonight and in the previous show are contained in this book. And Don goes into much more detail that we don't have time for now in the book. It's called UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions, A Scientist Looks at the Evidence. Don Donderi, of course, is a PhD from McGill University in Montreal, and he has, like Stanton Friedman, he is both American and Canadian. And I want to go back now to this whole government. You know, fans of the show will know I've written a book on the Kennedy assassination. And what it took was a film called JFK that happened in 1991 by Oliver Stone for the US government to go back and release all the files that were supposed to be locked up for an additional 30 years. They released those files. I'm wondering what it's going to take in the UFO phenomena that's going to act as something to spark the release of all those files into the private sector.
My guess is, unless large UFOs hover over Kingston, Toronto, or Montreal, or Washington, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, the government is going to be very resistant to releasing anything. As long as the public can be convinced there's either no problem, or it's all hallucinations or crackpots, the government will be happy, the US government will be happy to tell you that there's nothing to it. Other governments have changed their tune on that. Canadian government no longer collects UFO information, I believe, and they're quite willing to let you look at the old UFO information that they have, the so-called non-meteorite sighting file. No comment, though. They're not interested in telling you what they think. They're not interested in having a public position on it. They're letting it go. The French government has released UFO information from their always official, but very low-scale JPAN. I've forgotten exactly what the acronym stands for, but it's a UFO study group within the French Space Agency.
That's right, yeah.
The UK has released a lot of their own UFO data recently. Again, without comment, they just put the stuff up on the internet and let you take your pick. The Russians have released old Soviet data in an inconsistent way. We don't know what anybody of these people are hiding, but we do know that a lot of governments are letting out stuff that they didn't previously let out, and you can make what you like of it. The Belgian government produced a very thorough report on sightings in 89 and 90 that they just shrugged their shoulders about and said, here's the evidence. We don't know what we're seeing here, but our official investigator, who was a Belgian Air Force colonel, wrote the report and they made it public. And these governments are simply saying, we don't know.
What's the threat, Don? What's the threat? Why the cover-up? Now, I understand, we're going through a time right now when the NSA in the States, and in Canada, folks, we have our version of that too, are not wiretapping, but looking for keywords in emails. They're watching where you go on the internet to protect us from terrorists, and that threat's very real. Jesse Ventura was on the show, and we discussed that in much more depth, www.nightfrightshow.com. It's in the archives. What is the threat now? Why keep that stuff covered up to this day?
It's always a threat when you can't counter some capacity that is imposing itself on you. Now, this capacity is the capability to run a machine in our atmosphere that we can't duplicate, we can't shoot down, we can't control. To a government responsible for the protection of its citizens, that's a threat. Most of the Western world assumes, more or less, that the United States government, in the old days, was the umbrella protecting the Western world from the Soviets through mutually assured destruction. We were the West, they were the evil East. Our side had the US Air Force and ICBMs to deal with, mostly American, some French, some British, but the US was in charge. That's not true anymore. But the US still acts as if it were responsible for everything and everybody. And if they can't protect against these things, then they don't want you to know it, because that basically lessens their status in the world, put it plainly. Canada doesn't have that military status in the world, so Canada shrugs its shoulders. Great Britain is, frankly, all of the English-speaking world are allied in this, but the leading ally is the US because it has the most powerful military. And among the other Western allies, French, the other new opened up Eastern Europe, the Scandinavian countries, there's just not enough power or motivation to make much of this. The U.S. still conceals this. It's obvious that UFOs have been very interested in American nuclear facilities and foreign nuclear facilities. So it's clear that they can also, in case you didn't know, disable nukes. They can disable ICBMs.
There's a report of that in this, actually, folks, in the book, and
Right.
www.nightfrightshow.com.
And so they interfere with American defense,
That's right.
and that's a threat.
Yeah, big time threat. Now, I want to stay on that Cold War scenario, and this just came to me, and you probably witnessed me writing it down. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, folks, we were that close to nuclear annihilation, 1962. Was there any rash of reportings of UFOs at that time? Would you know of? Now, I know it's off the cuff, and it's not in the book, but
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
I
fair
wouldn't be
enough.
surprised, but I don't know.
Yeah, I was just curious if there was any
I'll
data
bet
on that.
once the documents are released, you'll probably discover there were.
There
There certainly are many documented cases of interference with U.S. nuclear missile readiness
big time.
on the record.
In the book,
In the
folks.
book, and somebody, I mean, that's basically borrowed from other people's books,
Yes.
but it's quite there.
But these are true reports,
Oh,
by
yeah.
the way, folks.
Absolutely.
There's not, and by the way, folks in the audience, stick around for a few minutes. We're going to get to you in just a few minutes. We're going to do a Q&A with Don.
Let me add one thing.
Please,
Ed.
please do.
There's a book by a man named Robert Hastings, Hastings, called UFOs and Nukes, Nukes. It was self-published, but you can find it on the internet. He is a literate, intelligent documenter of many reports of UFO interference with mostly American, but not exclusively, nuclear defense capabilities. It's well written.
Okay. By the way, folks, the book we're discussing tonight by our author, Don Donderi, is UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. A scientist looks at the evidence. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. It's going to take you to a place where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home, or audience members. Don's got a pile of books here. He'll sign personally for you, no problem if you're interested. Don, before we go to the audience, I want to continue with the Cold War thing. Now, I'm going to bring in the Kennedy assassination, and many people say that one of the reasons why Kennedy was killed was because he knew about UFOs. I think there's a plethora of reasons why Kennedy was killed, but because you're a UFO expert, I'd like you to speak on that subject.
I think every American president since 1947 has had some knowledge about the fact there's a UFO problem. Some of them have said they tried to find out more and were not told. How this works out in practice in the executive branch of the U.S. government, I wish I knew. You heard about the report by the Robertson panel commissioned by President Truman. It's believed that organization that was set up at the oversight committee circa 1952 or 1947 still exists. There's been a lot of disinformation published about that, and if you don't know this, one of the easiest ways to corrupt people's understanding for something is throw in just enough wrong information that's obviously
That's right.
wrong,
Yes.
that it makes any serious reader think, oh, this is nuts, so the rest of it must be nuts. In other words, it taints or poisons all the good things that are true by having added a few bad things to the mix.
Absolutely.
A well-known technique. There's been a lot of that used to disinform people about the American government's interest. It may be, as we said earlier, that the president does not have access to some of the work that's being done on what you might call the American UFO program. And I know that at least at the higher level of the intelligence community, some of the higher level intelligence people don't even know. So there is clearly a disconnect between compartment A, in which UFOs are being studied, the rest of the U.S. government, and the rest of the public. And that compartment is still fairly well concealed.
And I just want to also tell you a story, folks. On the internet, you can find this. Just do a YouTube on it. President Clinton, after he was out of office, was asked about
That's right.
Roswell. Have you seen it?
I have, yes.
Yeah, and he said he tried to find out, but he couldn't find anything. He said, but he clearly stated he's not sure if that's because there's nothing there
That's right.
or because he was being prevented from finding it. So that is kind of the situation the President of the United States is in right now. UFOs, ETs, and alien abductions. A scientist looks at the evidence. Don Donderi is our guest tonight, PhD from McGill University. Easy way to get the book www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. I'm going to go to the audience now. Folks, would anybody have any questions for Don? Anthony Mann's here, and he's a famous Canadian filmmaker. He's made Dracula, he's making Phantom of the Opera, and several others. He's also the host of a podcast called Horror Etc., and you can get that at horroretcetera.com. And you owe me $10 for that, by the way. Or you buy the beer after.
Absolutely. Well, again, Don, just as we acknowledged earlier, thank you for coming to Kingston.
You're absolutely welcome.
This is fascinating. So, it occurs to me just listening to you, what we need, especially in this particular day and age, is that we need a Snowden or a Manning to come out. And,
Good point, Anthony. Very good point.
I read an article earlier this year.
Yeah.
It was reported here in Canada, actually on the CBC, through Associated Press, that the number of sightings of UFOs in Canada has doubled
Yeah.
in the past couple of years.
I didn't know that.
Now, is that just because we're becoming more aware, or we're inhabiting more of the land, and that we're recognizing anomalies more, or do you think that potentially we're building to something that
A crescendo.
are we on a crescendo? Is first contact nigh?
Don't know the answer. A lot of people in the UFO business think that might be happening. Everybody is looking for what they call disclosure, which is the point at which the president, or say Prime Minister Harper, gets in front of the microphone and the television cameras and says, we are in contact with an alien civilization. That hasn't happened. I think it's unlikely to happen in the near future. But the report you mentioned was prepared by Chris Rutkowski, who's a Canadian UFO researcher, very much on his own from Alberta, who collects these things. People who do this do it independently. They either belong to an organization like the Mutual UFO Network, which is international, mainly North American, or Center for UFO Studies, the same thing. And they're volunteers. They have day jobs. They do what they can with their limited resources. Chris has been collecting this kind of data for years, published a couple of books on it, and his latest report, which you read, says that reports have doubled in 2012. I have read the report, and I agree. I don't know whether that means disclosure is right around the corner or not.
Interesting.
Disclosure is something like what would happen in the movie District 9, or Independence Day, if you want to go back to a horror one. In District 9, as you may remember, this is a movie that was done a couple of years ago. A giant UFO sits over Johannesburg, South Africa, and it's full of malnourished aliens who are ill. They're brought down in helicopters. They're set up in an apartheid-like situation in South Africa, harking back to the bad old days. But the thing is, the thing was sitting there. You couldn't ignore it. If something like that sits over Toronto or New York City, nobody will be able to ignore it. When they usually sit over something at night. And it's easy to ignore things at night because night fright you can dismiss them. Or you listen to them on night radio and you think, I don't have to take this seriously when I wake up in the morning, which is too bad because good, serious things get talked about at night.
That's right. They certainly do.
But it's not quite as believable.
Are they malevolent?
Don't know. The question is, do they have ill intentions? One of my friends said to me after we were talking about this, I hope they don't eat protein because we're protein. And they don't seem to have any visible malevolent intention. They do catch and release humans to study them.
This is where I was getting at.
Yeah.
And the trauma that these folks have gone through is very real.
Yeah.
And it would seem to me that an advanced species like that has the capabilities to do what they do, would be cognizant of the trauma that they're inflicting on their victims.
They seem to try to alleviate it, but not successfully, once the experience has been recreated through flashbacks or just outright recall of fully total recall or some aided memory. A previous guest at the program, one of the audience, reminded me that years ago in the Star Trek series, there was a prime rule, which I'm going to paraphrase, which was that if you approach a species that's not as developed as you, the first thing you do is do no harm. You keep your distance.
That's right.
You stand away. You don't reveal yourself or get them enmeshed in your advanced civilization.
The prime directive.
The prime directive. I'd forgotten that. I didn't watch enough Star Trek episodes as a kid. But we are being watched. There's no question about that. We are also being interfered with because of the catch and release program. They are also interfering with our defense capabilities by disarming our nukes at times. So what that all means and how far it's going to go, I wish I only knew. I talk about the fact we've got to deal with this. We have to talk about it.
That's right.
We, as a collective
society.
community, have to talk about that.
The world.
We don't want to leave it to the experts in compartment A here to think about it by themselves.
And folks, fans of this show will know the way I feel about things. There's only one race in the world, and that's the human race. And we get into trouble when we start dividing things up, like Dr. King said about the us and them. Very, very dangerous scenario. And unfortunately, that's where we're still at right now in the development of the world. We've only got a few minutes left. Does anybody else from the audience want to forward a question to Don tonight? Any questions? Okay. Any answers? Yes, please.
I got one question. It's like, I believe the fact that we're not the only people in the universe. However, I find it coincidental, if you would, that these sightings started within the 1940s, where the technology was great enough within the Western world to actually produce craft that could create these particular sightings. And it could be a military cover-up, like you say, the black projects that they have and so forth. So what evidence is there previous to the 1940s that would actually, or before technology was available to actually create these UFOs from our own technology?
Good question.
Yeah, very little evidence. The good evidence that I know about, first of all, there's evidence that some people think goes back to medieval times or earlier. There are paintings which can be interpreted as showing what might be UFOs. There are suggestions that some of the large creatures outlined in white chalk on various hillsides in England or in Peru might have been related to communication with other creatures who could only see them from above long before we could get into the air. But that's all speculation. What is best known is that there were UFOs sighted sometime around the mid or late 19th century. When did we first start sending electromagnetic signals into the ether? When telegraphs first sent long wires across the face of the earth, which not only sent messages from point A to B, but accidentally radiated them out elsewhere. When did we send big bursts of gamma radiation out into the universe? 1945, when we blew up atomic bombs for the first time. When did UFOs start showing up in numbers? 1945 to 1947. I think the answer is not that they're human military vehicles, but that they are vehicles brought here because we sent signals to other places indicating that we now had, as you said earlier, we had the matches. We were likely to be able to hurt ourselves now that we'd got some of this stuff. And maybe, in the best of all possible universes, they're here to make sure we don't put ourselves out, put it that way.
I often wonder, too, as an extension of that, Don, is if somehow we release enough nuclear weapons on our own planet, if we implode the planet, and therefore the ripple effect, which may affect their own planets, somewhere billions and zillions of miles out in the universe. Who knows? I mean, we're all intrinsically connected. There's no question, if you follow the Big Bang Theory, we all come from the same spot. So there it is. Folks, we're going to have to start to wrap up now. I want to thank Don for making the Herculean effort coming all the way from Montreal. And stick around, folks, because he has also brought bagels from Montreal, which are legendary. And I think I just discovered by saying that why the aliens are coming here. They're trying to figure out where the best bagel in the world is, and of course it's Montreal.
Absolutely.
There it is, folks. And again, the book is called UFOs, ETs, and Alien Abductions. A Scientist Looks at the Evidence. Don Donderi's been our guest, PhD from McGill. www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover. That'll take you right to a spot where you can order the book from your own home. And I want to thank Sarah Koska and David Yateman for their Herculean work as well in making this happen. And thanks all to our audience members. Thank you for joining us tonight. And thank you, Chapters Indigo, Kingston, Ontario, Canada. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.